So our third and final snippet looks at the continuing constitutional controversies of the Trump presidency, and along with judicial appointments, I think this will be the ultimate Trump legacy with regards to constitutional history. There are, I think, four that are worth commenting on. The first is the original one, the Mueller report, which looked into Russian interference in the presidential election and explored whether or not there was a conspiracy between Trump or the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence operatives to interfere with the election. This investigation goes on for basically for Trump's first 2 years in office. It gets heavy play in the liberal media, especially on MSNBC, and within MSNBC, especially on Rachel Maddow's show, which is the top-rated program on MSNBC. It becomes an article of faith. Maddow goes on at length night after night about intricacies of the Russian investigation. It becomes an article of faith that Mueller is going to uncover evidence that Trump improperly conspired with the Russians. When he releases his report, he says he has no hard evidence of this at all, although it's clear that the Russians did intervene in the campaign. And there's a kind of shock in the liberal media environment and among Democrats in the House. The Democrats had retaken control of the House in 2018, who had expected that they were going to use the Mueller inquiry to launch an impeachment crusade against Trump. That shock intensifies when the Office of Inspector General, every cabinet agency has an Inspector General, an in-house watchdog, releases a blistering report. So you can't quite tell it from the title here. Looking at the investigation of ties between the Trump campaign and the Russians, which is called Crossfire Hurricane. That's its code name. And what the report of the Inspector General recovers is that both FBI agents and lawyers in the Justice Department seem to cut corners in the investigation, including the most serious allegation. There was one Justice Department lawyer who eventually is fired and pleads guilty to a criminal offense, who admitted to altering the contents of a document to provide evidence for a warrant against a Trump campaign operative. I mean, this is obviously stuff that you're not supposed to do. So the Russian campaign, as politically, the Russian campaign damages Trump, I think, throughout his presidency. There's this sense that basically at the end of the day, he kind of welcomed the Russian assistance, kind of despite concerns with patriotism. But the legal aspect of that, this could be used as a vehicle for impeaching Trump after the twin hits of the Mueller report and then the Inspector General's report becomes there's no chance. But then very shortly thereafter, there is a new scandal that emerges. A member of the National Security Council, serving in his professional capacity, representing the military, Alexander Vindman, announces that that Trump had improperly withheld, or at least sought to withhold, U.S. aid to Ukraine, a country that is besieged by the Russians to its east, to pressure the Ukrainian government to announce an investigation of Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, who had been appointed to a board of a Ukrainian national gas company, despite the fact that his qualifications for this appointment seemed about the same as all of our qualifications for the job. And the sense was that the company had appointed the then vice president's son as a way of hoping to influence the Obama administration. And what Vindman argued that Trump wanted to do was to pressure the Ukrainians to announce they were going to investigate the Bidens for improper behavior. Trump, this is 2019. Trump, I think, correctly has sensed that Biden is the strongest challenger to him that the Democrats likely could nominate. The House opens impeachment proceedings. They hear from a number of National Security Council officials, Russia experts, Ukraine experts, and the overwhelming consensus is that Trump has abused his power here. That is, that although the Ukrainians never did make the announcement, that Trump tried to pressure the Ukrainians to announce this Biden investigation, and had done so by improperly withholding U.S. funds. The House then votes impeachment, considers impeachment proceedings against Trump, and Trump becomes the third president after Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton to have been impeached. Of course, again, Nixon would have been impeached if he hadn't resigned first. But the House makes they vote two articles of impeachment against Trump. The first is abuse of power, and that cites the Ukrainian example. The second is a contempt of Congress count, and the argument here is that the House impeachment process had subpoenaed a number of executive documents, and Trump had invoked executive privilege, and that in and of itself was an impeachable offense. This is an intriguing argument. I mean, you could certainly make this argument. The problem is that every president has done this since Dwight Eisenhower, and so in theory, by this standard, every president would deserve to be impeached. At the end of the day, there are only two members of Congress, one in the House and one in the Senate, who take the approach that yes, Trump has abused power, and therefore impeachment in the first article is warranted. But this contempt of Congress count is dangerously broad, and so they vote against the second. The first is in the House. The only Democrat who votes against who takes this pattern of one vote in favor and one vote against, is a congressman from northern Maine named Jared Golden, a young Democrat who was narrowly elected from a pretty conservative district in 2018, who argues that he believes the second article is constitutionally defective and also needlessly detracts attention from the abuse of power in the first. And in the Senate, Mitt Romney, Republican senator at this point from Utah, he'd previously been governor of Massachusetts, announces that he is going to vote to convict Trump of the first article, the abuse of power article, but rejects the second article entirely. The Golden-Romney, coalition here it's a different way of looking at impeachment. It basically says, look, we're going to focus on Trump, but that there's a danger in the House going too far with the impeachment proceedings. Romney becomes the first senator in U.S. history to vote in favor of convicting a member of the president's own party in an impeachment trial. So this is the first of the Trump impeachments. Trump also triggers litigation in areas that were kind of wholly beyond the scope of virtually every other president in American history, because Trump has so many business interests and so many instances in those interests where he kind of gets right up to the edge of the law. And the two big ones are lawsuits that deal with the Emoluments Clause, and then lawsuits that deal with Trump's tax returns. The Emoluments Clause is it's basically this dusty part of the Constitution. It's never really enforced, that says that U.S. office holders cannot accept foreign gifts. This dates from 1780s. The argument here is obvious. We don't want the British or the French giving U.S. senators gifts that might make them loyal to another country. But critics of Trump file a variety of lawsuits claiming that foreign governments or even foreign individuals who do business with Trump properties, from which Trump, of course, had not divested, violate the emoluments clauses. And this litigation goes on for almost all of Trump's presidency. Various district courts and appeals courts come to wildly different conclusions on this. It's a tough area because there just isn't much precedent here. And ultimately, in January, the Supreme Court decides to kick the issue entirely, saying that because Trump is no longer president, the the lawsuits have become moot, and they invalidate all of the decisions. So this issue that since we're going to get these really exciting opinions in 2021 on the Emoluments Clause, finally explaining what this clause means, the Supreme Court ends it in a quiet way. The second relates to an ongoing criminal investigation against Trump, the Trump business organization, by the district attorney of Manhattan, Cyrus Vance, who subpoenas Trump's tax returns. Trump fights this twice, all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that he should not be compelled to turn over these returns, or at least until he leaves office. The first case is kind of a mixed bag, where the Supreme Court sort of kicks the opinion back to lower courts and says, look at this more closely. The second case, though, they rule firmly against Trump, and as a result, he has to turn over the tax returns, and the DA's office now has those returns. So these kinds of issues, I think, are unusual for a president, but nonetheless, they're I think critical with regards to Trump. And then the last Trump impeachment, of course we all remember because it was only a few months ago. It's the aftermath of the election defeat, in which Trump argues that there was vote fraud that cost him the election. One of the oddities here is that Trump did much better in the election than the polls had indicated. Partially, I think, because he came on, he sort of surged in the last few days of the campaign. Partially because the polls they seem to have missed a lot of Republicans this time around. So you could have imagined Trump responding to the defeat by basically saying, "Look, I did much better than expected, and the media was hostile to me, and the establishment was hostile to me, and I still almost won." Of course, he doesn't take that approach. Instead, if you sort of strip away everything, his core argument seems to be that he was winning in the key states, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, for most of the election night, as these states counted the ballots of people who had voted on election day, who were disproportionately Republican, but then lost that lead in the following hours or days as the states counted mail-in ballots. And the core story of the 2020 campaign was that Democrats disproportionately voted by mail because they were concerned about the virus. Republicans disproportionately voted in person because they were somewhat less concerned with the virus. And so, the progress of the vote returns was easily explicable, but in Trump's mind, it had to be vote fraud. And he continues on this campaign for 2 months after the election, although again, there's no evidence of vote fraud, and the what he would need to prove fraud here was massive, because it's 3 states, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona. You would need fraud in all 3 states. And this culminates, as we all know, with this riot outside the Capitol on January the 6th. Which leads to Trump's second impeachment. He's quickly impeached by the House. He is convicted he's acquitted in the Senate trial, but by a much different kind of vote than the Ukraine impeachment. In the Ukraine impeachment, a majority of the Senate actually votes with Trump. It's the Democrats plus Romney, who are the people who vote to convict. In the second impeachment, there are 7 Senate Republicans who join every Senate Democrat in voting to convict. Richard Burr, Republican senator from North Carolina, Bill Cassidy, Republican senator from Louisiana. As expected, the 2 moderate senators, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, along with Mitt Romney, who had voted in favor of Trump's first impeachment. And then 2 somewhat surprising votes. Ben Sasse, a Republican from Nebraska, a conservative, but someone who had criticized Trump from time to time, and Pat Toomey, a retiring Republican senator from Pennsylvania. So this legacy of the second Trump impeachment shows that maybe it's possible to impeach a president under slightly different circumstances. One of the arguments against impeachment in this context is that Trump was about to leave office anyway. The specific charge that was before the Senate was incitement to violence, which has a pretty high legal standard. The House impeachment proceedings hadn't taken witnesses, and so they really hadn't built much of a case. So for those who are inclined to acquit, there are certainly legalistic grounds for the vote, but nonetheless, the margin, this 57 to 43 margin, is a striking one. And the Trump administration is particularly angry with Burr and with Cassidy, senators from very Republican states, who vote in favor of the impeachment. And that's it for our snippets for this week.